And what we do with the mood tracker, we did some of this in preseason, but just to remind you of the concept, we take an entire fan base and we chop off the fringe 10%. All the eternal optimists, all the eternal pessimists, they're out of here. We take the remaining 80%, kind of a silent majority of the fan base. What are they feeling? And you got to get inside the fan base. You got to be on the ground with these people. And what are you feeling right now as it relates to your program? Sometimes, if you deliver a true mood tracker on a team, it's surprising because perception is not always reality down on the ground. So I wanted to start tonight with Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a program that besides Bama, Clemson, like Ohio State, Oklahoma, LSU, recently LSU, there's no one else ahead of Notre Dame. Notre Dame has had multiple double-digit win seasons in a row at this point. Brian Kelly just got extended. This is a program that is very, very good. I would argue they're on as good a foundation right now as they've been in years, maybe even decades. So they're in a good position. But Notre Dame fans, still not all that thrilled with what they saw Saturday. It was a good solid win over Duke, but here's what they're thinking now. They're tired of being pretty good, and that's why I put Notre Dame's mood at drowning in goodness. It sounds great to drown in goodness. Drowning in water is terrible. Drowning in goodness, doesn't that sound great? No, it sounds good. They want great. They want to drown in greatness, not goodness. And goodness right now equals we're probably, if I'm a Notre Dame fan, we're going to be favored against every other team we play, but it doesn't matter, because we match up horribly with Clemson, and when Clemson comes in here, they're going to be a double-digit favorite against us, and how in the world are we going to move the ball down the field against that defense? We're not explosive enough. That's the word that keeps coming to the forefront with most Notre Dame fans that I've spoken with, looked at the Irish Illustrated message board over there, and let me first say I understand the frustration, so I'm not knocking you guys, but I just want to let you know, and I think most of you already do know, the explosive elements you want to see in the offense, they may come. But I think they're going to come in the form of Tyler Buckner, who is a current senior or a rising senior in high school who will be in the Irish's 2021 signing day class if he stays committed, which I think he will. He's the guy who could deliver that. Ian Book pretty much got what you got there. So that explosive element, just think this through quickly before we move on. I don't really think necessarily that's something you see this year, nor do I think it's something Brian Kelly is really even given serious consideration to. What I think Brian Kelly does is I think he looks at his team and he says, all right, the way that we currently do things is good enough to probably beat everyone we play except Clemson. If I were to try and radically alter something to maybe raise our reward proposition at the risk of really widening the gap in the risk-reward proposition, we could lose a couple of games from turning the ball over. And so I think he is content to stand pat right now. It equals a really good season. It equals a New Year's Six game. Like, that's the level you probably play at. And that's not the worst thing in the world. But yet, it makes it no less difficult for Notre Dame fans to look around and say, look what Clemson's doing. Look what Alabama's doing. Ohio State, if they play, look what they're doing. Why can't we be that? You can, just not necessarily in 2020. As for Florida State, I want to talk about a program and a fan base that would trade places with you guys in South Bend in a hot second. I've got Florida State's mood as flip the map mode. Flipping the map. A lot of you have gone digital on your directions and whatnot, but if you've ever held a paper map in your hand and you thought you knew where you were going, but then you pull in to where the dot on the map is, and then you realize, oh, I'm nowhere close to where I thought I was. That was kind of Florida State fans coming out of Saturday. It's not that anyone expected to win a national championship this year or the ACC, but they expected to see something a lot better than what they saw when the Noles played against Georgia Tech and lost at Doak 16-13. And you saw it on those ISO crowd shots towards the end of the game, further confirmed by talking to a bunch of Seminole fans. It's just we thought we were closer. Now, I haven't seen a whole lot of people hating on Mike Norvell. I mean, there's been criticism of the Garden variety, but, it's none of the fire this bum. Now, what did we get here? No, it's not that. It would be very stupid to think that way. To me, it would be very foolish to think that way. You wouldn't get in a car. I've been driving back and forth on the weekends sometimes from Nashville to Columbus, where I grew up, and that's about a 5-hour drive. If I didn't get to Columbus in an hour and a half, I wouldn't get out and start kicking the side of the car. The car did everything it could. It's impossible, unless you've got wings on the side of that car, to get from here to there in an hour and a half. It's also impossible to get FSU where you want them to be this year. Just impossible. Now, what you hope is, you don't have to torch the entire thing and start from scratch. And I don't think they have to do that. Maybe culturally, there's some issues to take care of. I don't think the roster's in a place where, oh man, we got to overhaul everything. But the quick fix is not the right fix at Notre Dame or at Florida State, and really anywhere, to be honest with you. So just give it some time there. It's not the easiest thing in the world to tell people, but flip the map mode at Florida State. Now, as for Texas, I have listed in smell test mode. Since we were using cars metaphorically, let's go back to it. If you've ever test driven a car, if you ever rented a car, you get in there. One of the first things you want to do is you want to smell the car. You're trying to catch a scent. You're like a bloodhound. You're trying to catch a scent for maybe water damage, or maybe a smoker has been in here recently. And if that's the case, you're cautiously optimistic, but yet you just want to make sure everything checks out and it is as meets the eye. And that's kind of the way a lot of Texas fans are. They've been burned before buying in. They've been burned recently buying in to the degree that they are now very tempted to buy into again. I got this team winning the Big 12. I got them going to the playoff. I've bought in. I think a lot of Texas fans, ironically enough, have been a little more hesitant than I have been. But there's a lot of optimism there because if it is, as it appears on the surface, this is such an opportune moment for Texas. You got the experience and talent at quarterback, the running backs. We've talked about Texas personnel ad nauseum. But if it is as it appears, then you quickly shift from smell test mode to like brimming optimism mode. That's why we do this segment every week. And lastly, the Clemson Tigers, just full-on airplane mode at Clemson. That's probably the mode I would be in if I were a Clemson fan too. You are light years above and beyond anything else in your conference right now. Probably the only top 10 caliber test that currently is on your schedule is Notre Dame, and that game is November 7th, and that's at Notre Dame. And so as we sit here today, it is September 15th. It's airplane mode. You don't necessarily have to be asleep, but when you're on an airplane, you're kind of spaced out. And the next time you are really going to be fully cognitive and dialed in, if you're not doing work, is when you start your descent. And that'd be exactly the way I was if I were a Clemson fan. I'm excited now. I'm watching every game. Don't get me wrong. And I'm checking the roster and I'm checking the message boards and I'm updated every day. But I don't feel challenged or threatened until at least November 7th. I really don't. And so I'd be kind of in airplane mode. I'm so pleased with where we are. I love our quarterback. I love everything about our team. I love our young talent, that defensive line talent, insane. We've got our head coach and Dabo Swinney talking about how this is the most talented roster we've had here. Like, what's not to like? The only thing that you don't like, ironically, is what people think is great about the Clemson job. It's the lack of competition, which is not their fault, of course. But I'll tell you, to be honest, it's one of the main reasons we don't talk Clemson more on the show. What do you talk about? You're talking about whether they're going to win by 4 or 5 touchdowns Saturday. That's what you talk about. And so, not Clemson's fault again. Airplane mode. That's where they are right now.